If I go and check my daily entries in Notion, you can see I have 1,339 items here. In this video, I want to tell you 5 lessons that I've learned after journaling for these years. Let's jump right into my Notion system. And the first point is to use different formats when you're journaling. Let me actually just open some day in Notion and we can see what I'm talking about. Before Notion, I was using a physical journal and obviously everything was text-based. So I was using, morning notes, the focus for the day, and at the end of the day, I was also, jotting down some pros and cons. I migrated the same metrics here, also lessons, but I also added more. So I added some drop downs and I added some metrics that are number based. So you can see basically the setup of my daily template is that I have a morning section where I input some data and I have an evening section. Now I also have the habit tracking, but that's a different video. Hey, just a quick ad break. If you want your own life operating system to plan your week, track your habits, see progress visually, and just consistently have awesome days, you can join our Life OS community in the link below and get it for free. I'm sure you will love it. Back to the video. But the point here is that having these metrics that I added, the number ones and the drop downs, helped a lot with pattern recognition, especially when I'm doing like my weekly review or things like that. And you spot patterns, like for example, at the end, I judge my recovery and performance. So that helps a lot to correlate that with the focus of the day, or, the energy at the beginning of the day with the recovery at the end of the day, and what type of day it was. So that all helps a lot. And especially when you move to weekly reviews and monthly reviews and so on. So this is just point number one. Don't fixate on just having text. And key 3 inputs that I use are freeform, drop downs, and having metrics. Now, point number 2, excuse my dog. So moving on to point number 2, and this is to integrate in your Notion multiple timeframes. So that's where Notion shines, because I started in a physical journal, and doing, weekly, monthly, and quarterly reviews was a big pain in the ass. So now it's kind of a breeze. And in Notion, I started with just days and weeks, but then I progressed and started building up. So let me just show you how that looks. So you kind of noticed and saw the metrics that I'm tracking, and this is a daily view. And if we open a week, this is kind of how it looks. So the metrics aggregate. Has to do with habits. But now when I do a weekly review, I see all my focuses for all the days. I see all the pros, the cons, and my performance and recovery. This is really nice for weekly review. And then the weeks also have the pros and cons and lessons and so on. And then if I go into months, I can easily see all the weeks and so on and so on. So this is kind of how it aggregates. All the insights, all the data kind of moves from lower time frames into higher time frames. So from days all the way to years. And the focus, like you can think of focus flowing from higher time frames into lower time frames. Like this is really awesome. And this is precisely where Notion is amazing. Because for example, let me just open a week. Like in my weekly template, when I'm planning my week, when I'm setting my intention for the week, so this is my focus for the week, I can right here integrate and see my monthly focus. This is not something I input. This is something I input on the monthly time frame. And then since every week is related to a month, I can immediately see that. And then, so this allows me to narrow down my focus time frame to time frame. So this is point number 2. I see a lot of people missing this, and especially going beyond days and weeks has been super beneficial to me. Point number 3 is following a consistent format. So there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it just makes it easier to stick to. Like it's easier to create a routine when you're very clear. Like if I go to my days, it's very clear. Like I already know what I usually input in my morning notes. Like I know what kind of format my focus has. What, the pros are bullet points and cons as well. I know how to drive my lessons. And This is, I mean, one point, it makes it easier, but second point, it just aggregates better into higher time frames. Like this is what I showed you before. It's very cool to see in higher time frames the same structure. And now when you look at weeks, I kind of check out the pros and cons for all the days, and you can notice that the weekly pros and cons is basically kind of a summary of the pros for each day. Same goes for cons, same goes for lessons. You just kind of remove anything that, you know, doesn't hold weekly significance. And on higher time frames, like, I mean, from weeks up, I also do a summary. I limit it to 7 to 12 bullet points. So now every single cycle in my system has a summary, just the core points that capture the essence of the cycle in 7 to 12 bullet points. That helps a lot because you can go on a monthly level, and now you can just look at the summary of each week, and then you can derive pros and cons and summary of the month from that. And then, of course, that also happens on a quarterly and yearly level. So this is tip number 3. Just make sure you pick some specific format and stick to it across the time frames. If it's pros, cons, and lessons, great. If it's something else, whatever. But make sure it's the same for your days, weeks, and months. Point number 4 is a very interesting one that I didn't start with, but I found it very useful. And this is what I call a dual metric approach. What that means is if you see on a daily level, at the end of the day, I judge my performance and recovery. Now, there is a very good reason for why I have 2 metrics that I set at the end of the day. So first of all, quick note about performance. Performance relative to what? Now, in my system, that's relative to the type of day that you're having and the focus of your day. So this is important because, for example, if you were having a rest day and your idea was to get some rest, recovery, maybe spend time with your loved ones, perfect. Then you judge your performance based on that focus. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is you gotta have another metric because you focus too much on the performance, and if you have an execution day and you're focusing on pushing your projects forward, that's what's going to happen. If this is your single metric, then you're going to just disregard recovery. And what's going to happen is you're going to have peak performance and then it's going to drop and you're not going to know why. But if you are tracking recovery, what's usually going to happen is you have peak performance a few days in a row, but then you see your recovery starts to dip. And then probably at the start of the next day, you're going to see your energy level is not high anymore. And only after that, you can see your performance start collapsing. So it's kind of a lagging indicator. You know what I mean? So it's very important to balance out performance with recovery to spot patterns. And if you're doing your weekly reviews, that's really going to show up there. So that's point number 4. Moving on, point number 5 is to force the focus. What I mean by that is, yes, like I showed you when I'm planning my week, I have my monthly focus and I look at it before I set my weekly focus. And this is great because that makes sure that every time you set a focus for the cycle, you align it with higher level time cycle. That's great, but that's not all. It's also very important to limit yourself aggressively on the number of focus points. So you can see I have 4 here. I would recommend having 3 to 5 focus points this is for the week. For a day, I mean, I would definitely stick to 1 to 3, but recently I've even actually tried cutting them down even more. So I've noticed that the less things that I focus on during the week, during the month, during the day, the better I feel, the better my productivity is. And just the overall feeling of anxiety and overwhelm is highly correlated with the number of things that you focus on. Just create a rule for yourself to not exceed, let's say, 3 key objectives for every cycle. And if you can limit it to 1, that would be awesome. So like for me, the best days are really where I have only 1 thing to do. And if I accomplish it, I feel the day is awesome. And that's all I have to worry about. So anyway, these are my 5 tips. overall journaling has helped me a whole lot over the years, and I just hope you give it a try.